This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. My name is Kurt North and welcome to our wrap-up party of Season 8. And it would be not right if we didn't have the venerable, if that's even the right word, Chris Knowles. Chris, how you doing, mate?
Well, just as long as I'm not the venereal Chris Knowles.
Yeah, well, I'll choose my words more carefully next time, maybe.
I'm doing great. Great to be here. Really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, so we talked about Season 7. Season 7 had quite a few things in there, didn't it? It had, we're talking about Herzog, and we talked about, the tiredness of the show, and Chris Carter, and all kinds of things in that episode. In that episode with like Millennium as well. So yeah, I think we just dive straight into this because this is going to be an interesting conversation. So Season 8, we talked briefly about it when we recorded Via Negativa for the first half, but just in general, first off, as a kind of like, I'll like the litmus paper and see where we end up. What do you think to 8, and how do you kind of view it looking back with different eyes now, with future eyes?
Well, I think it's by far the best of the LA seasons, the LAX seasons, and I think it's the last great X-Files season, or just last great iteration of the X-Files. It was the last hurrah for the franchise, if you will.
Yeah.
I mean, I am a big fan of I Want to Believe. I know I'm in the minority with that. I'm not sure why. I feel like it's just classic back to basics X-Files. But yeah, this was the series that I was waiting for because I was actually rather horrified by the first half of season 6. I just was like, what the hell happened to my show? Why is friggin' Lily Tomlin on my show?
Yeah.
It was just really, too many failed comedies. It was all very well done. It was all, the machine was at peak performance, I think, at this point in time. It wasn't the X-Files. It kind of, they almost went out of their way to break every rule that they had set for themselves in prior seasons. I actually did like season 7 a lot, and it's weird because it's very personal. It doesn't really have anything to do with what's on screen. And I went back and watched those episodes and I'm just like, what was I thinking? My God. But season 8 was just like from the jump, it was just, we're back. We've gotten all the nonsense out of our system, and now we're just back to, first principles here. We're going this is resetting the clock, as it were. And I was just, I was on board. There was that little, period, I guess, that fallow period when you had like a lot of back-to-back, not incredibly fantastic standalones, which, to me is like, it's interesting because they wanted to basically make the second half of the season a serial or a quasi-serial. And I think what they did is that rather than taking all the dross, all the, the Jeffrey Bell scripts and everything, and spreading them out the season so that, they don't stink too hard, they sort of put them all together. It was just real tedious. None of them were badly made. There's no Fight Club there.
No.
It all just seems like very rote and paced by numbers. It's just like, you get the B team to do all your fill-in episodes and stuff. I mean, you've got a lot of episodes to do, so they can't all be winners. But that said, it kind of set me up for when we start with Per Manum and we have that whole mythology 4-parter that just knocked me on my ass. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great season, and I think it's the last great season. It's the last great X-Files expression, let's just say. But
Yeah.
and it was interesting too because I just remember that there was just so much negativity in the groups and stuff. And I had kind of started, I was basically dipping out after season 7. And as far as commenting or taking part in everything, I'd stopped pretty much around the 4th season. So that said, I mean, it's just like the disconnect between what I think the real audience wanted and what the fans wanted, or the hardcore self-appointed fans wanted, was, as always, very different. And like I said, fans don't realize that they're just not that important, that they're basically used by the studios to be free advertising, free PR. And I think a lot of fans have a very grotesquely elevated sense of their own importance because, they can get, they'll get a little bit of swag in the mail or something, or maybe get to go to a premiere or something. And, so they'll act as basically free publicity for the show, the rest of the year. So, you can't really take that stuff to put too much stock in it, take it too personally. But I know that, people like Vince Gilligan took it very personally. So we can get into that.
Yeah, we can. So just talking on what you were saying about the change around, because you're looking at the likes of Schuylkill and Salvage, but if you look at the production kind of order, it kind of goes 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 3, 7, 9, 10, 12, 11, 13, 8, and then it hits 14, and that stays in pretty much order. And I know that in the podcast that when we've talked about it in the show, I know that certain fans of the show obviously see the kind of what's the word?
Discontinuity.
Yeah, the continuity. The discontinuity, because there's like Cortlan said it best when it was in, I think it was Dead Alive, where it's snowing and it's like it's not the right time of year to snow, and there's moments like that, and the pregnancy goes on for 14 months and things like that. Which
that's a major error that Frank Swatnitz is very irritated about, because Within takes place the day after the end of Requiem.
Yeah.
So it's not, judging this by real time doesn't make any sense, because it's obviously the next day. I mean, if you watch Within, it's not like, oh, well, Mulder's been missing for 3 months. I mean, he went missing the night before.
Yeah.
So I think that, a lot of fans, it seems like a lot of the more vocal fans, don't pay attention to the details, because they just want to just start ginning up the outrage machines. And, that this is a perfect case of that. So, but, as far as what you were talking about with the order, there were a couple of things going on. First of all, was the obvious issue that they didn't have access to David Duchovny. And his agents and his lawyers had, arranged this very torturous kind of schedule. It almost seems to me like they wanted to make it as difficult with, David would be fulfilling his contractual obligations, but make it so difficult for them to work around that they'll just drop it, and just let it go. And, there were, like, Frank had said, there were all these like formulas that they had to reach. But the other issue too, that affected the production versus the airing order, was Gillian Anderson had asked for a lot of time off this season. And I don't think it was in her contract, but I think it's just something that she just went to Chris and Frank and said, listen, I mean, I've been here around the clock for 7 years. I want to spend time with my daughter, the things I want to do, family kind of things. So they were very gracious in allowing her that time. Unfortunately, some very stupid people said, oh, they're trying to get rid of Gillian on the internet and everything like that. And those lies just sort of, you can still see traces of them, like on Wikipedia and so on. So this is like X-Files fandom, I think, had just become completely toxic by this point in time. And that's fandom. I mean, I don't think this affected, the 99.9% of the people who were watching the show. I don't think any of them went on, particularly back in that time period, they weren't going on the internet to like, oh, I've got to argue about this episode, right? They didn't care. And that's 99.9% of the audience, certainly by that time.
And as you say, it's likes of Shiwako and Salvage, where I think Gillian was saying things like, you'll find out by December when they readjusted things. And, the episodes got shifted around because of Dave Duchovny in The Gift, for example. I think that was on the sweeps at the time, which is an unusual episode to have on there because he's not in it very much. And it was like kind of billed as like Dave Duchovny is back kind of thing. And, it's not even an episode based on him. So it is an intriguing season from that perspective in the way that they handle Dave Duchovny's appearances, as well as just, that they actually did use that as part of the machine as well.
Well, the funny thing too is that, he was like, oh, I don't want to be typecast as Fox Mulder and everything. And then like, what's the movie he signs up to do? Evolution.
Yeah.
The Ivan Reitman UFO movie with the redhead. So, that's Hollywood. But like I said, I don't think most of the viewers cared. I don't think that all this backstage stuff, and in particular, this is the time before everybody was spending all their time on the internet like they do today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the dial-up era. Most people still were on dial-up. People didn't have smartphones. Most people didn't even have cell phones. So I think that the distorting effect that I think has killed everything, everything is dying now as far as comic books, comic book movies, science fiction. I mean, everything is just dying. And it's the distorting effect of this very small, extremely small very vocal minority. But luckily at that point in time, it wasn't really a factor. The only thing that it was a factor is that it was really pissing people off within 1013, because a lot of the people who were going around bad-mouthing them were people that 1013 had sort of reached out to and, gave them information and, done favors for. I mean, all this kind of stuff, they were uncommonly obliging with the fans. And then a lot of these same fans just turn around and stab them in the back. So I think that was part of, like I said, Vince Gilligan was extraordinarily angry about this. And I think when you go in the 9th season, you watch that movie, that episode, Scary Monsters.
Yeah.
And it's just like basically a long whinge against the fans. I think that's Vince Gilligan for sure.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, actually, with the fan base as well, that in we do see Layla Harrison in the first instance in this season as well, don't we? So
yes. We can get to that, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we will talk about, because there's quite a lot to talk about. But what I found fascinating when we were recording the episodes is something that I didn't really realize at the time, but there's the amount of kind of intricacy and the writing, as you say, with having all these episodes back to back. It was basically the Kim Manners, Chris Carter, Frank Spotnitz era, and for episode upon episode, and that's something we haven't seen either, which I think really instilled as you say, the kind of the plot going through all of the episodes and having that serialization, just having that team write it. I mean, even like Sophia, when Kim Manners wasn't directing, we had Tom Warmby, but it was always like Chris Carter and Frank Spotnitz as the main writers, and Vince was like sort of permeating around that. And I thought that from the cohesion point of view really does help the season.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Chris was the most involved in this season that I think he had been in a while. I think he was the most engaged, and he was, certainly the most engaged he'd been in a long time on the mythology. So I think that, you have to realize that Frank was doing double duty with this show and with the wretched Lone Gunman spinoff. And Vince was basically the showrunner on that, which is kind of shocking to me because he's so great and so brilliant, and that show is so horrible. But I think that's just, I think he was a little out of his depth writing full-time comedy. And then, John Scheiben was doing... Did Scheiben even have a writing credit in season 8? I can't remember.
Yeah, he had Badlar.
Badlar,
yeah.
Which I like. I'm sorry.
I like Badlar. It was quite funny. I think Tony was like saying, "I'm going to do a podcast on a commentary on just a horrible episode of X-Files. You can guess what it was. It took me ages to guess it because I like Badlar.
Yeah. So I think really what it is that, you didn't have, well, you had a lone gunman, but Vince and John were pretty much running that show. You didn't have Harsh Realm. You didn't have Millennium. You didn't have these things to worry about. And I think that really showed that, that Chris Carter, it's like Daddy was home again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Daddy was home and he was going to sort of put things to right. I mean, you had so many great people working, doing so many great things on that show, but you really needed that sort of figure, at least as a figurehead, at least, somebody steering the wheel, right?
Yeah.
And, you talked about Kim Manners. And I think one of the criticisms I would have of season 8, there are 2 criticisms that I have, and they're not deal breakers in any way, shape, or form. First of all, I thought that Mark Snow was just burnt out. I think he just was exhausted, understandably so, doing 7 seasons of the X-Files, 3 seasons of Millennium, Harsh Realm, and Lone Gunman. I mean, he was just, the well had run dry. And it's no dig on him because I think he's a brilliant musician, but it's just the way it is. There's only so many ideas that you can put across in that format. So I think, stuff started sounding like kind of syrupy and soapy, which is kind of back to his roots, right?
Yeah, kind of the melodrama stuff with Scully's theme and that. Is that what you're alluding to there?
Yes, exactly. And also, Kim Manners became part of the upper echelon. He was an executive producer at that point in time. Kim was a very, very kind of emotional guy. He's very labile, let's just say. I mean, he was very, Glenn Morgan had said that he had come by when they were doing Space Above and Beyond, and he went to visit the X-Files set. Kim Manners was shooting a scene and he was in tears. Like I think it might have been Oubliette. It's such a powerful emotional force on the show. And I think that because of that, it did start to maybe veer a bit into melodrama, in certain points. And that's something that fans were like, this is like a soap opera now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of like a quibble. That's not necessarily like criticism. It's something that if I had my druthers, they would have dialed back on a bit. But overall, I don't think it hurt the show.
Yeah, no, it's right. And I think, as you say, that the kind of Schuer kill salvage area, even though that surrounding it, you've got Via Negativa and Bad Light, that feels a little bit like of a stopping point after Via Negativa. And that's what I did during the rewatch when I watched it before we recorded early in the year, that I got to Via Negativa and I did stop because it was like, oh, Schuer kill and salvage coming next. That, and then like what you say, they're not the worst episodes in the world. They're just kind of forgettable.
I actually like Sure Kill a lot, so I think it's a lot better than people give it credit for.
Tony definitely says that it's one of the best openings. The best opening in the Sure Kill it is a great opening sequence in Sure Kill.
I'll tell you something else though, is that there was that kind of fallow period where the energy just seems to slacken. But if you go back and watch that stuff now, I think it stands up really well. Certainly not as 5-star television, but just good, solid, X-Files. It's all very well produced. It's all very well shot. You have just a machine humming along, like I said, at peak performance. The problems that I had with those was that, you're in the excitement, you want the pressure and this tension to build and build and build. And then it just kind of like, oh, they're down in the subway, chasing microscopic organisms around. I mean, it's just like, stop, who cares? But so like I said, I mean, it's all very well made. And one of the things that I really appreciate, especially about this entire season, and you see it even like really terrible, not terrible as far as television goes, but on the sliding scale of X-Files greatness, just let's say weaker episodes like Salvage. I mean, look at how hard it looked like it was shot in Vancouver. I mean, they're making LA look like Vancouver, it's like the smoke machines and the rain machines, and slicking down the streets and the blue light. And, it's like all of a sudden it looked like the X-Files again. And I don't think you can really say that about 6 and 7. There are no episodes in 6 and 7 where I'm like, oh yeah, this just feels like classic X-Files. So even if it's in the service of a weaker story, it's still just really solid production. And just, I really did appreciate that extra effort they were making to kind of give it that old Vancouver Sherlock Holmes feel again.
Yeah. I think we discussed last season about the beginnings of that with Brand X. The Brand X was really trying to do that as well, and you see that move into season 8, and it does really well in that regard. And I wouldn't, the look of the entire show, which is something I was going to touch upon as well, because I think we talked about last season that season 7 was full of blues, and this season is full of orange. We've got
so, very orange. Yeah. It's like when I picture this season in my mind, it's very, very orange. Yes.
Yeah, and I think obviously like Per Manum and Essence and Existence call into play for that in particular. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned obviously likes of the likes of Medusa, which is the Boston subway one, because that's kind of quite a vehicle and action piece for Robert Patrick. And what do you make to the infusion of Robert Patrick? I know we discussed it in Via Negativa in that episode as well. So we have talked about this before, but even the recently past when we recorded this, Robert Patrick and Annabeth Gish talked on a discussion for the companion app recently, and that was with Frank Spotnitz. Yeah. So that was interesting to see, but and how much behind the scenes that Robert was given to, as you say, season 7 was slowing down, and it felt tired, whereas season 8 really helped with Robert Patrick's introduction.
Yeah, it was just phenomenal. It was a great casting choice. It's interesting because I was reading about some of the people, like they had actually read Bruce Campbell, which is a very strange choice. But I think it came down to, I think that the 3 choices were Lou Diamond Phillips.
That's the one I remember, yeah.
Hart Faulkner and him. And, they said that when he walked in the room, it was just like, there was no question. They just knew. And Chris Carter had said that, when he started speaking, that was the voice I had for this character in my head. So there are a few things going on. One is that he's a tremendously hardworking guy. He'd done like 90 films by that point, all these B movies and stuff that he had done. Yeah. So he was a pro. He was a seasoned pro. And he wasn't a star. He wasn't a prima donna. He wasn't full of himself. He wasn't a brand. So he wasn't bringing that kind of baggage to the table. He was just very easygoing personally, a very easygoing guy to get along with, not a prima donna. He worked really hard, and they gave him a lot of great stuff to do. So, but I think, one of the things that I think people really need to understand is that by the 7th season, the conflicts, the tension between David and Gillian was just killing everything for everybody. And it's just like, you think, well, you've got a show, and it's just like, well, what if these two are fighting and everything? It's just like, when you show up to a set every day, and like the main attraction, right? The two stars are just constantly at each other's throats and constantly bickering in between takes and everything. It just makes everything harder. It makes everything a lot harder. It just kills the vibe. It kills, you've got all these people who are not making a tremendous amount of money. All these, people doing the craps and the behind the scenes stuff, gaffers and best boys and productionists. I mean, you name it, up and down the line. I mean, these people are just basically working class people making working class wages. And they show up to work, they're expected to work these crazy hours around the clock. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Sometimes 15, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. When it's just this constant pissing match between your two stars, it takes all the excitement and fun out of it. Never mind the fact that it's a 7th season, and 7th season is, the classic death stroke for most long running series. It seems to be like 7th season is when things really just start to fall apart. So I think the fact that that tension was not there, that the constant bickering and screaming and all the rest of it was not, slowing everything down, because it's, it was slowing. a lot of things slowing down, the fact that they're in LA and it just takes forever to get anywhere in LA and all this kind of stuff. You just get bogged down. And I think that there was a lightness. I forget who used that term, but somebody said there was just a lightness on the set when Robert showed up. It was just like a new energy that he brought. And, I think you can see it. I think you can see it on the screen. And I think everybody was just like, oh, okay, well, we get this fresh infusion of energy. Let's go with it.
No, and you can see it. And, we've talked about Robert Patrick's performances right through this season and just how good he is. And the way that this season's structured, that, even with the kind of the date inconsistencies, and you can understand the reasons why. And having, episodes like Invocation and Via Negativa and, The Gift and Medusa in the first half of the season to give him that kind of bit of room for maneuver to really appreciate what Dogger is. And then you've going into like sort of the Per Manum and the mythology, and then having this final kind of buddy cop aspect in Vianen and David Duchovny and Mulder and Scully and Doggett trying to find out where they actually fit in the universe, I think works really well as a through line right through the season. I think that the story itself, like we've talked about many a time on the show, really works in the way that it's delivered that way. And in some ways, with David Duchovny's return, in some ways it can get a bit jarring. And I like it for the reasons that he doesn't quite fit in the world anymore. But there is that element in the show as well where we do feel that it's a different beast, and the whole season feels like a different beast.
No, I absolutely agree. And he did sort of, he was quibbling a bit. He's like, he felt they should have gone more into what he experienced and all that kind of stuff. That it was just kind of perfunctory. The thing is though, and one of the things that he did sort of acknowledge is that like, well, they've got to keep the show going. It's like, I'm going to be gone. And they've got to set up all these characters for the next season. It's like they can't spend 3 episodes delving into my ordeal. And in all fairness, I mean, it's like they didn't spend three episodes delving into Scully's ordeal after her abduction, right? I mean, it's like you had one breath, and then all of a sudden, it's Firewalker. And then it's everybody's just running around and all this kind of stuff. And it was just, I think like there was a line or two, in like the first act, where it's just like, you sure you're up to this or whatever, and so it's just the way the series was set up. It wasn't a serial, it wasn't a soap, it was episodic television of the old school model. So I don't think you really have the time to get into that. One of the things that I said before, and I think bears repeating, is that I think there's a great chemistry between David and Robert Patrick.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think they really acted well together. There's a real kind of classic 80s buddy cop kind of, it almost like you can imagine like, I don't know, like Bruce Willis and Robert De Niro or something, or Bruce Willis and Clint Eastwood, right? Like you got the wisecracking Bruce Willis, David Duchovny character, and then like the hard-boiled, blue steely-eyed Robert Patrick character. And, it's just like that classic buddy cop antagonistic vibe that I thought played really well. And David said, that he was just having a lot of fun and he really enjoyed playing against him. And it's interesting that it seems like he played more with Robert Patrick than he did with Gillian, because I'm thinking, you said Vianen and of course, Empedocles.
And even in Alone, he's in the field and actually helps Dogger in the end. So even in Alone, he's there. So,
and well, I mean, I think just and this is something that like the shippers were screaming about, is that like from after say 3 words, but even with 3 words, I mean, you're starting to see this dynamic where he's playing more with Robert than he is with Gillian, right?
Yeah,
and I think you see that throughout the season. And a lot of this had to do with, in universe, Scully was pregnant, but also outside the universe, like I said, Gillian just really was trying to dial back her schedule. She just didn't want to be working 6 days a week, 15 hours a day, for the entire season. So I think there was a lot of that too. So a lot of things that you see in particularly episodic television, I think a lot of people, particularly like younger fans who come in and have no history about it, because there's this constant influx of new fans, right?
Yeah, there is, yeah.
So they don't understand, and a lot of them are Zoomers who don't understand anything. So they don't understand how the world works, right? Because they're kids, right? I mean, nobody does when you're a kid, right? There are a lot of things that, throughout the series that people just yell and scream about to this day. It's like, get over it. It's all because of like all this backstage shit. You know what I mean? It's like the plan was that, and they set this up in Requiem, right? The plan is that there was going to be a new syndicate that Krychek and Marita were going to start building a new syndicate. They were going to take over what was left of the old syndicate. And that was supposed to be the through line throughout the entire mythology in this season. And what happened is that Laurie Holden signed on to do some show that was it Lonesome Dove or something, something
that got lost in the ether.
Yeah, that absolutely nobody remembers, right? And I think that obviously you're not going to be able to have that same dynamic, right? Just all these kind of things throughout that, like you said, the whole thing with the production and having to deal with David's weird demands, and then Gillian wanting time off to be with her daughter because, her daughter's growing up and she's barely seen her. There are all these kind of things going on that they have to take into account. They can't just barrel through hella high water, particularly people like in 1013 who, they're trying to create like sort of a family atmosphere for the show. They didn't want it just to be like, well, it's our way or the highway. So there are all these things backstage that are influencing, the conduct of the series that people are familiar with and need to be taken into account.
And what I think, even if you look back at season 2 with Gillian's original pregnancy, that, that was the whole thing that kicked this off. If you wouldn't have had this stronger season had all of this stuff that's going on would have happened. If David and Gillian had done season 8, and looking at season 7, it wouldn't have been. I don't think it would have been as strong. It needed to have this shake-up, and it needed to have, like you say, with Gillian taking a step back, and that's part of the argument for season 9, isn't it? That that Gillian's in it too much. That from a contractual point of view, that sometimes it should have just been more of a case of just let them untether a little bit and let them roam a bit more. But yeah, it's you wouldn't have had this kind of like sort of version of season 8, and I think that would have gone amiss really if we never had this in an alternative universe, that you wouldn't have had these strong episodes, and for that reason. And I think that looking back on it in hindsight, it actually works to its favor in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's funny you should bring that up because it's like my favorite season for the mythologies seasons are 2 and 8.
Right.
Okay. And they're both with like that missing element. You know, Gillian in her pregnancy and David, with his contractual issues and so on. So I think that there's like a tension there. So when somebody's actually missing, like, he's not on set every day, right?
Yeah.
He's not there. It's not that hard to start thinking in those terms, thinking like in these story terms of like, why isn't he here? What happened to him? And, the same thing with Gillian. But also, I love Frank. I love Frank as a human being. I think he's one of the absolute nicest people in the world. He's such a gem, and I think he's brilliant. My main criticism of his handling of mythology was that it didn't have the kind of intimacy that it had set up in the first 2 seasons. It's all very intimate, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden, I just picture like, I don't know, I even picture this, but I just picture like, like some sort of like John le Carre movie with like, guys in white parkers, skiing down slopes and it all just became very James Bond in a lot of ways. Like, the whole thing with Russia and everything. It's just like, I anything that takes place in Russia, I just, my brain just turns off. I'm just so bored by it. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm dumping on Frank because I think he's brilliant and one of the nicest people in the world. But it's just like, it just wasn't my vision of the show. I mean, like my vision of the mythology is like Deep Throat, where it's just like, this is reaching into your house. You know,
Yeah,
you don't have to go to, you know, Japan or Siberia or to the Arctic Circle. I mean, this is coming into your house. This is why it's so scary. It's not as scary when it's going into these places that we've seen a million times in a million like It Press Files kind of movies. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, well, he himself says that in the Monster of the Week stuff, doesn't he? That it's embedded in the real. That's where the real scares are. So
yeah, well, absolutely. But it isn't just the real though. But it's also the intimate. It's the intimate, and the thing that's I really like, and if you know, Frank is right along there. I mean, Frank is co-writing this stuff and co-plotting it. You know, even the episodes that he's not writing, he's right
got a hand in it.
Yeah, but but it's just like, you know, like what's going on with my ultrasound, you know, like, oh shit, you know, I'm going to the hospital and can I trust these doctors? That to me is the X-Files.
Yeah,
The X-Files to me is like when this stuff reaches into your life every day in like your most vulnerable places, in your most vulnerable times. You know what I mean? That's what I really like about this is that, you know, you did have a lot of kind of widescreen, you know, to that great opener when they shot in, you know, they shot out the Mojave Desert. And, you know, you just like all of a sudden, like the widescreen is back. You know, the widescreen had gone missing for 2 seasons because of the costs and the difficulties in logistics, right? And all of a sudden, it's like we're back to like wide season. It's like, you know, we see trains and all this stuff again, you know, all this stuff happening. But it's also like, so you have that episode where Absalom escapes from prison, right?
Yeah.
And it's very cinematic, extremely cinematic. It's almost like I'm waiting to see like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jesse the Body Ventura like show up or something. You know, it's very filmic, right?
Yeah.
But then it's just like, oh shit, all of a sudden this guy's in your house. You come home from work and he's in your, you know what I mean? That's to me is the X-Files. It's like the X-Files is about when the stuff comes into your life. And like, that's scary.
Yeah.
That's scary stuff. I'm not scared by vampires. I'm not scared by all the rest of it. I'm scared by like this stuff coming to you, like into your life, like Red Museum, you know, like they're shooting kids up with alien DNA and they're doing with the cattle and everything. It's just like your basic everyday life is not safe. So you see that again in this series. And that's why I just really, really zoned in on it. You know, I just really felt it because it felt like you can relate to it. It's relatable. You know, gulags in Siberia are not relatable. I can't relate to that.
And I suppose even likes of like Medusa, you know, in fact that it has that element to it, and 3 Words is kind of like sort of looking at the census, and there's quite a few things in this season that does that.
Well, I should like Medusa a lot more than I do because I spent a lot of time in the Boston subways.
Yeah.
Okay, when I was a kid, you know. The Boston subways were like, I still dream about being in the Boston subways. But the thing is that it didn't look like the Boston subways.
Yeah.
It didn't have the same look. So
yeah, that's always the problem when you know something, isn't it? That's not the way it is.
Well, it's probably like with you, like if you hear somebody like an American actor or somebody doing like, not just a British accent, but like a Midlands accent.
Yeah.
It's like, no. That's, you know, when I hear bad Boston accents, I can't hear it. It's just like the movie is done for me. I mean, I love the movie The Departed because, you know, you do have some real Bostonians there, like Marky Mark and Matt Damon, like really just hitting those notes. But then you have like Alec Baldwin and Martin Sheen, and they're not even going anywhere near a Boston accent. And it just sounds like somebody chewing on goddamn tinfoil.
Yeah, it's like I don't know if you've ever watched Frasier, but it's when Frasier do the Manchester accent, and it's like, oh no,
oh god, yeah,
it's horrendous. It absolutely is horrendous.
Yeah.
So going from that intimate, talking about the, you know, like sort of Perman, which you were talking about, the body horror that they use throughout the season as well, because body horror is a big element of season 8, isn't it? That in itself is really dark and gruesome, but it's interesting how they brought that back. And again, you mentioned season 2. it is harking back to season 2. Personally, for me, I enjoy more of the globe-trotting stuff in 3, and the Apocrypha and things like that. And I prefer 3 over 2 in seasons. 8 and 3 are probably my favourite seasons. But this season does harken back more to 2 in the body horror aspect in my eyes as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of like the template. I think about F. Masculatus seems to be the, the ultimate expression of that. And it's so funny because, like, I wonder how they got away with it. I guess because they're on Fox, But it's just like, if you took,
well, it's no comedy. It's no comedy, is it, Chris? It's no comedy.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, if you took that level of gore, say like in a feature film that you wanted to then play on the network, they would never allow that. But for some reason, it was allowed. I mean, the level of just extreme gore, it's like 80s, splatter movies. It's like a Clive Barker movie every week. So I don't know. It's still amazing to me how they got away with the amount of gore and whatnot that they show.
It is interesting. So going back to the kind of ethos of the mythology then with the, and I know that Cortlan talked about this on her episode recently with the, the virus changing and getting to the point where Mulder dies again, but dies for some significant time, and the virus obviously changes people, specifically in Billy Miles. How do you pass that in the X-Files lore with the fact that in theory Mulder was barely alive during those 3 months, and because it is quite a hard pill to swallow in my eyes personally. I get round it just about, but how do you envisage that kind of aspect of like the rebirth of Mulder in that way?
Well, it's aliens. It's really just magic. And it's magic, you know what I mean? It's almost like sword and sorcery practically. It's alien DNA, alien viruses. They can do everything that the writers need them to do. All you just have to say is that it's alien viruses. And I mean, I'm older than you, but it's like, watching all these classic sci-fi movies of the 80s and 90s. And it's just like, you were pumped and primed for this kind of thing. Like it didn't, I don't know if it's more the shipper contingent that has problems with this, but it's just like, yeah, you know what? I was reading comic books of the 1970s. I saw all those great classic movies in the 80s when they came, like almost all of them on the day they came out, right? In 90s. I mean, this is my bread and butter for my entire life. It's just when this shows up in the X-Files, I'm just like, yeah. And it's just like, but it's funny you should mention that because I just remembered, like, I love Colony and MDN. It's probably my favorite mythology 2-parter. Right?
Okay.
But at the same time, I just remember when I was just like, oh, is this where we're going now? Shapeshifters and clones and everything. It's just like, is this what we're doing now? And it's funny because, like I said, I love those episodes, probably my favorites. But I just remember at the time thinking, oh, come on, this is just like I've been here so many times before. Show me something new. Yeah. But in the overarching mythology, it does make sense. But so, like I said, it's alien DNA. Alien DNA is magic. It can whatever you need. Alien DNA is just basically your screenwriter get out of jail free card. You know what I mean? That's pretty much what it is.
We're talking about like the bounty hunter and stuff because when we get towards the end, well, we get to the final 2 episodes of the season, Essence and Existence, we start to see the birth of the Billy Miles being this kind of Terminator-esque infiltrator, invasion of the body snatchers kind of aspect to it, which will filter into the show next season. It kind of it plays to that, and it becomes more. I think I used the word in a couple of episodes, more propulsive, in the way that it's the perfect example is when John Dogger Mulder gets thrown through the glass, and John Dogger ends up in that room. And you can feel the palpitations of the heart when you think, oh, is Billy Miles just going to come in? He's an unstoppable machine. And they kind of start to go through that more propulsive stuff. And this is the birth of that. And it is a new take. And as you say, that with the Marita and Krychek idea, which I remember at the time, and talking about people, being a bit naive at the time, really disappointed when we came back from Requiem going, oh, where's Marita? Where's Krycek? I really want to see them really push it, really push the thing. Because I was aware David Duchovny was going, or at least doing half the episode, but I was really hoping that, Krycek and Marita would take it over. And I was disappointed, but I wasn't really fully understood what was going on there.
But then again, I love when Krycek shows up again in Dead Alive. It's so creepy and so just incredibly memorable. To me, it's all the more memorable that we haven't seen him since Requiem. What
about Cigarette Smoking Man? Because he doesn't appear at all in this season.
I'm not exactly sure what the thinking was there. They never really discussed it, but he's supposed to be dead, right? He doesn't show up until the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's 2 whole seasons until we see him again. I don't know. There was almost like a weird, almost like mercenary type of thinking in the X-Files. They were very ruthless with supporting characters, but arguably he's almost like more of a main character. He's a recurring character. I mean, he's in this weird gray zone.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what the thinking is that they did not want to saddle the Doggett character. I mean, they did say this specifically. They did not want to saddle the Doggett character with the old mythology. They wanted to create a new new era, a new stage in the myth arc. So again, it's obviously this Invasion of the Body Snatchers thing.
Yeah.
But they wanted to give him something fresh to do, because if he's just doing the old syndicate thing, it's just like, then you've got to bring all the viewers back up to speed with it. It's just too much.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say Body Snatchers, because it's just like, I saw Invasion of the Body Snatchers when I was 12, right? And I saw it in the movie theaters. And I'd never been so scared in my entire life. Like, that was like the most terrible. I mean, I walked out. I remember walking to this day. I remember walking into, it was this great old movie theater called the Cameo. I remember walking into the lobby, this beautiful lobby with like the red velvet curtains and everything. And just thinking like, is that person real? Is that person real? I mean, I'm 12 years old, obviously. So, but it's like that movie just seared into my brain. And one of the things, since I will watch a lot of old movies and stuff, I'm just always just constantly reminded by how many, like a handful of films seem to be so seminal to the X-Files experience. Aliens, right? Terminator, particularly Terminator and Terminator 2, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because we even have Veronica Cartwright show up, don't we? Right? So it just seems to me that there are a handful of films, like seminal sci-fi horror films, that 1013 just go back to again and again and again, and yeah, I mean, this is Body Snatchers, right? But it's also the Terminator. It's like Super Soldiers, like Terminator plus, it's like the Body Snatchers are Terminators. They make Terminators, right?
Yeah.
There is like this recognition, but it's put together fresh. I mean, one of the things I say about like Stranger Things, like the first season, the real Stranger Things, is that it's just an absolute mishmash of, it's like you just wrote a bunch of plot points from other things on a index card, threw them all up in the air, and then that made your story with it. But that to me is part of its genius.
Yeah.
And it's also part of the X-Files genius that, yeah, everything is derivative. Everything comes from something else, sometimes more than others, right?
Yeah.
But it all coheres into something original. And that to me is like, that's almost like, David Bowie said, I never had an original idea in my entire life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that to me is like the true kind of, it's like an other next level of genius, where it's just like you take everything that you like and that you've been influenced by and make something, completely fresh and new out of it. And that's what I think we saw in this series particularly. I mean, I just felt like everything just felt, aside from that sort of fallow mid period, right?
Yeah.
When nobody's, they know nobody's watching anyway. So just put the stinkers up there, right?
Yeah.
It just all felt like very fresh. And it's interesting because like when I first watched Within and Without, right, it was obviously like just playing all those classic X-Files beats, but it'd been so long. I mean, it seemed like, it was 2 long years or 3 long years or everything where we saw this stuff, and it just felt like, it felt like alien. I was just like, what am I watching here? And then like, well, wait, this is all like, drawing on classic elements of the series, but it just felt so new, and it was jarring in that regard.
And I think likes of Within, especially with the introduction of Doggett, but just the nature of like things like, for example, in Within, I think which work really well is the manhunt where you've got John Doggett flying around in helicopters, really making use of the landscape, and it felt like a big event. It felt big. It felt sort of
cinematic.
Yeah, and also
widescreen.
Yeah, widescreen, and you've got it's on the chase trying to find Mulder, but then also when you are in kind of the stuff like, for example, when Gibson Praise was around, that Doggett had this massive team behind him, and it wasn't as you say intimate with likes of what Mulder and Scully would be doing, because they always felt like they were on their own because they are fighting that cause. But Doggett comes in and has this kind of entourage of people, and even like sort of those little moments throughout the whole show, really, and using like Crane, for example, the fact that he's been infiltrated, it felt like it feels like John Doggett's coming from a different background, and it does give you that little Zeus up, and it works, and yes, it goes back to some X-Files stuff, but it's X-Files with a little sprinkle of other things, and that's what I think I really like about this season. And talking about, like you say, with the mythology, which is why I find Krycek an interesting one with Doggett, because I think that having them linked together, especially when they have that little argument at the end of Existence, I think it is, or beginning of Existence, where he's like saying, this guy almost killed me. Why are you listening to him? And that really works, because we know that Krycek just jumps from one thing to another. But I think it just generally works overall, because the actual mythology is stripped back. It is very kind of straightforward, and Mulder's gone. That is your main narrative point. That is your plot point. Mulder's gone. You need to find Mulder. And from a show.
Oh, yeah, there's a focus. Okay.
Yeah, the focus. Yeah, absolutely.
Never underestimate the need for a series to have a focus like that. You know what I mean? There has to be, even if it's like you're doing the whole standalone mythology kind of thing that a lot of other shows do today. You've got to have that unifying principle, I think. But, a couple things that I wanted to add in as far as, what you're talking about with Within and Without and so on. First of all, Chris Carter had cut the two episodes together and showed them, for the cast and crew in a theater.
Right. Okay.
In Los Angeles before the premiere. And I would have loved to have seen that, because that must have been phenomenal. Because it's so, it almost seems like it's more cinematic than most movies where it's so widescreen.
Yeah.
But, a couple things that, I wanted to point out is that in the earlier episodes of the X-Files, you had guys like Section Chief McGrath, right?
Yeah.
Who were just total hard asses, just unbending. You know what I mean? They just wanted Mulder out. And I think bringing Kirsch back was a great idea, because Skinner was just part of the team.
Yeah.
Skinner's not going to be like adversarial to them at this point in any shape or form. He's bought in. He's down with the program.
Yeah.
Bringing Kirsch back just really added a level of friction that I think you need. And the FBI is a mess, right? And it always has been a mess. But it's like, even still, they would not allow a guy like, Mulder just spend all the money he wants and go wherever he wants and do whatever the hell that would never happen in any organization. You know what I mean? So you needed somebody who's going to like crack the whip. You know what I mean? And I think James Pickens was a great actor, has a great screen presence, and just really brought that antagonism that you need for a show like this. But also like the way that they bring in Noel Aurora. So Noel Aurora is like, he's X, he's Deep Throat, he's Marita. Marita never really filled that role the way they intended. But he's like X and he's like Deep Throat, but he's bad.
Yeah.
He's like leading these people on and feeding information, but he's doing so for his reasons, and it's like, well, yeah. X had said, well, you're my tool. I call you when I need you. Right. But this is a guy who's just taking advantage of Doggett's, team player mentality and just screwing with him, trying to get him killed. So I think that, that was a great addition too. You need that kind of presence. One of the things that I think the series really lost that I really appreciated in the first season is it felt like they were part of an organization. There's
Yeah.
all these other agents floating in and out of the stories. They know Mulder, they think he's insane. When it really became so tightly focused on Mulder and Scully, I think that something was lost. I mean, maybe they gained something in return, but it's like I feel like I stopped feeling like they were FBI agents. It almost felt like, like the Thin Man. It was like Nick and Nora Charles or something. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, yeah, they're in the basement of the FBI building, but it really starts to feel more like film noir or something, or, some private eye like Raymond Chandler or something. It doesn't have that feeling of like, this is somebody who's a loose cannon within a very rigid organization.
Yeah.
So I think that bringing back those elements, I think really helped the focus in the story because, going back and watching the episodes like a lunatic, like I do, it always seems like, Mulder and Scully are sort of like just floating in this dream world half the time. They're not anchored in reality. They're not, there are exceptions, like saying Monday, with the boring meetings that they have to go to and stuff, but it just doesn't have that feeling that they are part of an organization that is very rigid, is very hierarchical, that there's a chain of command, that, there are rules that can be followed or broken, and there are consequences for breaking those rules. So.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because there's other TV shows that come into mind where they do kind of play more with the, they have the overall story, but they actually have like people that come in who are above them and the interplay, like what Kirsch would be, but use that to better effect. But having said that, Robert Patrick and Pickens together work exceptionally well. I think that
great chemistry
is just fantastic, and it's just a shame that we get the beginning of this, and then this is not happening today. In the next couple episodes of season 9, that you're giving Doggett something to really grasp onto as a character, to to instill that kind of emphasis and his agency and his drive to run the X-Files, because he's after what Kirsch knows and stuff, and they kind of drop it, and it's a shame because they do work so well together, and you see that within this season. I think that they do. I think it's exceptional acting between the two of them.
Oh, great, yeah, and like I said, James Pickens, great screen presence, and like I said, you just needed that kind of unbending authority.
Yeah,
where he's just like, oh, the X-Files explanation.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Here we go. Here's the X-Files explanation. Been waiting for it for a while. But yeah, I mean, Skinner as well. You talked about Skinner, that he plays a new role in this. And then what I noted in a couple of episodes, like The Gift, for example, that the X-Files and the way that Doggett's portrayed in the season is that Doggett is after the truth, but the truth is more of him being looking for justice rather than actually physically finding what Mulder would be after, even though we're not quite sure what Mulder wants. He just wants justice. And like we said, I think we said it in Via Negativa, didn't we, that he wouldn't stop. At the point where an X-File would normally stop, he would be like, but hang on a second, there's no answers. I need to know. I need to get to the bottom of it. It can't just shut the case down. And that's the way that Doggett is. And I like that balance. But through this season, there's a lot of times where, like in The Gift, for example, where, Skinner's the one that's going, let's not tell Scully. And then in, I think it's The Gift. Oh, yeah. Is it The Gift where Scully? Yeah, because Scully's, which is always a bit weird, that Scully signs off on something because it's to do with Mulder's brain disease. And that doesn't make any sense. But there's other things, there's these little secrets that are kind of instilling through season 8. Up until obviously the super soldiers, so it's interesting how there's a little play on that truth, and hiding people to protect people from the truth and stuff like that, which is a slight change, and I quite like that.
One of the things you alluded to there is that kind of there was a little bit of fuzziness, with the brain thing. It seems to me that like Frank and Chris both wanted to be screenwriters. They both wanted to do movies. There's part of that generation that that's the golden ticket.
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about continuity errors as much, right? The point is that like, so when you talk about Doggett, it's like I'm not satisfied. The great sort of start to that is in Vacation. It's like, well, what the hell's going on? What do you say, Dad? What are you talking to this kid? What are you talking about? So it's just like, but you can't carry that over. You know what I mean? It's like you can't, because TV today, there would be a case like Invocation, and then the first act of the next episode would be just like, what the hell happened? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
what's going on? So, but this talks what I'm saying is that, like, you know, this whole more screenwriter mentality where movies can keep things like that hanging because there isn't a next episode.
Yeah.
Right? There isn't the next part of the story where these things need to be resolved. You understand what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
And that was just a very roundabout way of addressing your point there, but you know, it's just the nature of the beast, right? It's just it's the way things go. People, you know, again, fans just don't understand what it's like to work those kind of hours at that kind of intensity for that period of time.
Yeah.
It's just brutal. It's just absolutely brutal, and you know, mistakes are going to get made. You know, like they do have people like script supervisors and all these kind of people and script editors. I mean, all these people are sort of like, that's their job to keep an eye on that. You know what I mean? But, you know, what are you going to do? It's not something that bothered me at the time.
It doesn't bother me. It's always interesting when you critique something that you pick out these things, because on a watch, I would never really kind of pay attention to it, or if it would enter my mind, it would just go out the other side quickly. It would be like, all right, okay, and it would be gone. It's just generally when you critique thing, I kind of go, oh, that's interesting. That doesn't make any sense. But I know, as you mentioned before, with some of the fan base, and Star Trek is a case in point, where, you know, if it's not the right class of ship or doesn't have the right port window, then it's kind of like, well, yeah, but does it really matter? You know, in my eyes, it's like I'm there for the story, not necessarily for the actual minutiae of detail. But everyone has their own view, but that's the way I view it anyway.
Yeah, well, again, it's just the nature of the beast. But another point that you raised that I want to just address is the brain disease thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, we have this 3-parter, biogenesis, 6 extinction, blah, blah, blah. And then the results of that is cigarette smoking man develops like brain cancer or some sort of brain neurological.
Yeah.
And we see that in Closure. Okay. So the consequences of this experimental surgery that he underwent was ending up with brain cancer. Right.
Yeah.
And then we see him dying, and he's pretty much dying at the end of Requiem, or whether before he's, you know, thrown down a flight of stairs. Yeah. So the whole thing with the brain cancer, again, it's like one of these things where like fans just aren't paying as close attention as they think they are, because again, within is the next day after Mulder disappears. It's the next morning, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't a 14-month pregnancy because they're not following calendar time.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the stuff is being alluded to is happening off screen, but it's just like, it makes sense that Mulder would, you know, contract the same disease cigarette smoking man does, because they both messing around with the same kind of things, you know what I mean? So,
yeah, because it all goes back to Tunguska and Terma.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, the problem, I think, the problem with maybe with some of the fans in the X-Files is that these things are not, you know, again, like one of the things I just got so tired of back in the 90s is just watching people arguing about things that just didn't happen or weren't said. You know, people just like, somebody will just show up, some rando shows up on the X-Files board somewhere, everything is just like, well, this, that, and the other thing. And then like all of a sudden, like all the lemmings fall in, you know, like, oh yeah, this, that, and the other thing. It's just like, it has no bearing on reality. You know, my great example of this is, you know, back in the 8th season when all these shipper types were talking about, oh, they're trying to get rid of Scully too, not realizing, no, what was really happening is that Gillian had specifically asked for time off.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, people just start, you know, people just start repeating just this troll nonsense, like, oh, well, no, I heard that they said that, you know, my cousin's brother's mother had said, you know, she works at the commissary on the Fox lot, and they said, oh yeah, they're trying to get rid of Gillian Anderson too. And it's just like, shut up, shut up, shut up. don't talk anymore. Get off the computer, go out into the forest and just stop being an idiot.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, again, it's toxic fandom. And it almost seems like all fandoms become toxic these days. But I'll tell you a story so I'm old, right? I'm 56 years old.
Yeah.
And I was, precociously involved in fandoms back in the 70s and stuff. And there used to be these things, fanzines, like actual fanzines that were done like maybe on mimeograph machines, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day. And fandoms would become toxic then. You know what I mean? It's just like when a bunch of people who, maybe don't have the best social lives or anything, social skills and personal lives aren't exactly fulfilling, when they get together and they just start bouncing stuff around, all their baggage that they bring into it, it's going to show up in the conversation. So, a great example is, so I have a friend, an older guy, he's retired now. He owned a comic book store for about 30 years or so. And he was involved in fandom, like in these, what they called APAs, Amateur Press Association.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. And these were like, basically kind of like fan Usenet kind of things back before the internet. Right. And he said that, he published a Legion of Superheroes newsletter. And he said he just had to stop because A, it got just super, super negative. And B, that was the text that he was getting was all just like really negative and everything. And the artwork it started being just all porn.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
all the Legion of Superheroes, like, in pornography scenarios. So,
right.
Yeah, he just, but that's just, again, that's toxic fandom circa 1973, 1974, when absolutely nobody who was not involved in it could pay attention to it. You just didn't have access. Today, everybody has access to it. And that's just makes it worse.
Yeah, well, we could talk hours for like sort of the way that Twitter kind of builds up the, a clique of people. But in positive and negative, but you can look at it both ways, that you have, positive areas of the space, but there's not that kind of interconnection anymore where you would have like sort of that kind of conversation between and debate. A lot of it will be kind of like you've got the people here and this people here and these people there, and sometimes they'll cross over, and then there's a massive hoo-ha, and we see that all the time on Twitter and various different fandoms with Star Wars and X-Files and Star Trek and all kinds. There's always going to be that.
Well, but it's like I said, toxic fandom is redundant today. These days, toxic fandom is redundant because all fandoms become toxic.
Yeah.
And it's just the nature of fans. It's the nature of fandom. And it's just been amplified. It's like the toxicity, of 1973 is like one of those little handheld transistor radios.
Yeah.
Now it's a Marshall stack that goes all around the world.
You're right. Yeah.
There you go.
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple of things more I want to just quickly touch upon. We get the introduction of Monica Reyes, Annabeth Gish. What did you think to her in the couple of episodes that she appears in?
Oh, well, this is not happening. It's one of my favorite episodes of all time. So,
right.
And it's interesting because Monica season 8 is not Monica season 9.
No.
I think that there was, so like I said, Chris is, it's definitely Chris and Frank all the way. I mean, Chris and Frank are just basically like a unit, right?
Yeah.
But Chris is kind of stepping back in season 9. And I think because of that, you just see a lot of different Monicas throughout the series.
Yeah.
That last series. It's just like, I just don't think they knew what to do with her. And, each writer sort of had their different take. It gets to the point that she's like, almost like Scully Light. She's almost like a skeptic at one point in time. But then she's like always, so I sense the presence of evil. It's just like they just couldn't really get a handle on what they wanted to do with her.
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate because to me, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, to me, I think Chris Carter's concept for Monica was like, what if Melissa Scully became an FBI agent?
Yeah.
And it's like, this is, we hear this said out loud, right?
We do,
in
yeah.
existence, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, you remind me of my sister.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's just like that to me was the point I think they always kind of regretted killing off Melissa Scully because I think they wanted to do more with her character. But she had signed on to that series that had lasted like 8 episodes, and like everybody lost. So I think that I think there was always a sense that like that was a really good presence to have in the series. You know, that Melissa's kind of, you know, that new agey, goofy kind of, but still competent aspect of the character. So it's like that to me, I think that was the elevator pitch for Monica Reyes. It's like Melissa Scully as an FBI agent, and it just gets lost. But I think she's great. And it's like the way you know, particularly Chris wrote her character, I think was just perfectly suited for Annabeth Gish's whole mien, you know, her whole delivery.
Yeah.
I think he really wrote to her strengths. I don't think her strengths were like being sort of this hard driving, you know, Scully light. You know, she's not Gillian Anderson. She's not Scully. And I just think that just gets lost in the 9th season, even though I am in the extreme minority and I actually like season 9 quite a bit. You know, my main criticism of that season is just, who the hell is Monica?
Yeah.
Like, who is she? Like, nobody, you know, she has no identity. She's just whatever the story kind of requires a female agent to be, she becomes.
Yeah.
And it just gets really, really weird. And so anyway, I really, really thought she was great. I really liked the character. I was really so like back at this time, I was like this huge Gillian Anderson fanboy. You know, I was just like total fanboy crush.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a second, wait a minute, what's going on here? Step back. What is this? Female agent? I don't think so. You know, I was like I was total testosterone brigade. And but I really liked her. I thought she was great. And I like the fact that she was that, you know, the thing that I really enjoyed, and it was obviously deliberate, is that like Doggett comes in and couldn't be less like Mulder if you tried.
Yeah.
Right? He's just anti-Mulder. And I think that we see that with Monica Reyes, even though it's sort of leavened by the familiarity of Missy. You know what I mean? And I think that is the genius of the conception of that character that I think gets lost. And then by, you know, that the revival season is just like, what?
Yeah.
What are we talking about here? You know what I mean? And I mean, I think that was more like, you know, it was just an acknowledgement. You know, she was a good soldier. She put up with a lot of nonsense. And let's not forget, absolute torrent of hate, of just hateful abuse that Robert Patrick and Annabeth, particularly Annabeth Gish. I mean, all these fangirls and shippers were absolutely horrible, horrific, nasty, abusive, hateful, derogatory. I mean, you know, every adjective you want to choose towards Annabeth Gish personally.
Yeah.
They were attacking her personally. It was just like unbelievable. You know, people talk about toxic fandoms now. It's just like, oh, you know, where the hell were you in the 90s? You know what I mean? It's just like, what? You know, they just absolutely personal hatred. Like these people are just pouring out the most vile, obscene hatred towards people who, you know, I think Vince Gilligan said it. It's like, you know, Robert Patrick didn't force David Duchovny off the show. David Duchovny left himself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, exactly.
You know, it's just like season 8 was originally supposed to be Gillian. She was only contracted for 8 seasons, and everybody was certain that she was going to leave. And everybody was kind of shocked when she didn't. You know what I mean? And she did so because of all the pay disparities that she just wanted to rectify. So, it was. I just remember like scanning that stuff and just being so horrified by just the absolute bile that was poured on the people who did absolutely nothing wrong.
And it's a testament to them as well, because, you know, you listen to that thing with the companion app and we've had Annabeth Gish on the show, and you know, and there's a newfound you know, kind of relationship with the X-Files in the way that, you know, the Gishies are around, for example. People have looked at Doggett and have to reappraised him. And there's a bit of like sort of like going back and seeing the X-Files for what it was at that time, which I think is great. And as you say, going back to what you're saying, you know, even at the time, it wasn't all, you know, it wasn't all like sort of like that. It was just the minority, which we have to keep on mentioning because that is what it is. It's the minority. It's not.
Yeah, a very, very tiny minority with an extraordinarily inflated self-importance.
Yeah.
Like their sense of self-importance is like metastasized.
Yeah, exactly.
But unfortunately with Twitter, so like I said, it used to be back in the day, nobody cared what like, I don't know, maybe at the very most 500 or 600 people were saying on all TV X-Files or wherever. Nobody cared. It was nothing.
Yeah.
But now with Twitter, it's like, the distorting effect of social media. Particularly with all these cowardly, ridiculous execs, corporate execs who think they think that this is some sort of representative sample. Oh, well, if 50 people are saying this on Twitter, there's got to be 50 million people who think the same way. It's like, no, there isn't. It's just those 50 people who are freaks.
I just wanted to catch the hot potato in the room with regards to the opening monologue scene with Mulder in Essence, because a lot of people, obviously we have what happens in the revival, but it's all distilled down. It's all the beginning here, and it's probably the most eloquent way of putting what Chris Carter was thinking. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the scene and the monologue that Mulder says in this, because it has permutations right through to season 11 now. Even to the point where No Raw says, they had that chip in the neck. We've got the chlorination in season 9. All of this starts here. And I spoke to Michael J. Petty with this when we did Essence, but I just wanted to get your opinion on it, because it is vital to the show moving forward into right up to like the most recent seasons.
So we're talking about the Mulder paternity thing, is what you're saying?
Yeah, because the actual the way where the transcript says it's kind of like sort of it goes through. Is it conception? Is it a miracle? Is it science? Is it this? Is it that? And I think it just really kind of and Michael J. Petty was saying, why can't it be all?
Oh well, yeah, that's me too. All right, so let me just explain my take on it.
Yeah,
Scully is barren.
Yeah,
right. And I feel like fertility is restored during the sixth extinction.
Yeah.
And I think that the giveaway there is that you remember when Dr. Barnes comes in with the bag of fish and all of a sudden they're alive again.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a womb. So it's almost like, sperm in the womb.
Yeah.
It's not the most subtle of visual analogies, but there you go. It's Chris Carter for you, right? So I think her fertility is restored then. And I think that the cigarette smoking man in NME does something to sort of facilitate William having these genetic kind of powers. So I will just fight anybody to the death on this. I mean, Mulder is definitely the father.
Yeah.
Definitely the biological father of William.
Yeah.
Okay. Scully's fertility is restored because of her exposure to the ship. And I think that probably would have been elaborated more, because there was plans to do sort of like a zombie apocalypse mythology in season 7. It just kind of got scotched.
Yeah.
Whatever. And he said this, Chris Carter said this more explicitly since, because he just likes to play these little games and get people all fired up and everything. Because it's just called showbiz. That's P.T. Barnum kind of showbiz.
Yeah.
I think he knows that Mulder is the father. Scully's was messed around with during that whole event in NME. And then maybe if you go back and watch it, maybe that was actually the real point of NME. It wasn't about this whole disc and everything. Because none of that makes any sense. Why does he have to that he could get anybody to do that? It's all just very strange.
Yeah.
He can get anybody to say they're Mulder, right? Yeah, I'm Mulder. Boing. They got your brains, right? So I think that in that regard, I think that the point is that was all a ruse to get Scully's to do something with Scully, because I don't think that was before All Things, right?
I think so.
Enemy aired before All Things, I believe, because All Things is
Enemy was episode 15 and All Things was 17.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I think the point is that, Secret Smoking Man thinks he's the father because he's like, he's the father in the way that like Henry Ford is the father of the motor car or something. You know what I mean? He's the father because he didn't create William as a child. He created William as a weapon.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That to me makes sense. And I think Chris Carter sort of, he's let the cat out of the bag a little bit more with that. I think that was kind of a miscalculation, but I don't think he really understood the whole atmosphere of social media at the time.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yes, Mulder is definitely the father. So I don't need to say it again. I've said it 4 or 5 times.
Yeah. No, it's like, I think the pertinent question in the scene, in essence, is when he asks about when you render a miracle into a simple trick, what of the soul, can it be replicated? It's those questions, those abstract questions, which aren't really necessarily meant to be answered, and it's kind of like meant to be left there in the ether of like, okay, so what, it's there's a numerous different things. And I think that's where Michael was coming to in that kind of aspect that I don't want to talk for him, but he was kind of like saying, well, it could be necessarily like you're saying, all similar, all of that could be distilled down to a potential, but that's not the reason why Chris Carter's saying it. He's saying more of a case of the kind of like the divine entity of stuff and the abstract nature and kind of stuff like that and the soul. What is it to be a person rather than actually what is it to be William? It's like, what is it to be a person? And I think that it gets lost after this episode. This is where I think, as I say, is that it's the most eloquent it's put in the way that the monologue was done.
See, one of the problems is that, like, first of all, David Duchovny was out the door at this time.
Well, yes.
And I never liked the way he did the voiceovers. He just always sounds so incredibly bored. It just sounds like somebody's holding a gun to his head and telling him to read it. It just, I think it's very easy to get lost because I think most people just like, all right, let's just start the real story now. Enough of this, who cares? And I'll tell you, when you talk about highlights of the season, which we can talk about, one of the highlights of the season is the teaser for Existence, which I think is one of the best. You hate it. The Spy.
I do. I
do. You bastard. You bastard. You bastard. I love it. It's great.
Okay.
But anyway, I'll tell you, like, so you had that great teaser, the opening thing where it's just like, you see all this wibbly wobbly stuff, and then all of a sudden it's Mulder, on the spaceship.
Yeah.
But then the next episode is like Chris Carter with his thesaurus out. It's just like, like all these words that absolutely nobody still uses or nobody uses in conversation.
Yeah.
I think it's very easy to get lost because of the context that information is presented in.
Yeah, exactly. And you hit the nail on the head. So I think that's everything that I want to speak about. We could talk about generally highlights and lowlights of the season, and anything else that you wanted that I might not have touched upon over the course of the season that you want to discuss, really. So shoot away.
Like specifically?
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I should bring up is that David Duchovny for years had been agitating to make the show more of an ensemble.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He felt that, A, it was unrealistic that it's just Mulder and Scully doing all this stuff. And B, it obviously put all the pressure on them.
Yeah.
Personally, that I think was a great, probably the primary driver of their tension between each other. They just got sick of each other. I do like the fact that we see more of, we obviously see Kirsch more, right?
Yeah.
And then we start to see, we have Doug and Reyes towards the end of the season, and then Adrian Crane being sort of like the little pissant kind of character.
Yeah.
So, I just feel like bringing more of a supporting cast was really what the show really needed. They probably went a little overboard in the ninth season, at least at the beginning of the ninth season.
Yeah.
But I really like Carrie Elway's character. I think he's just a great screen presence himself. But anyway, I think the show could have benefited greatly by doing this earlier on in its run. It would have taken a lot of pressure off David and Gillian, obviously.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It would have given a lot more voices to express story ideas, right?
Yeah.
I think it was just like anytime it was the X-Files, it was Mulder and Scully on those magazine covers, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was
And
like,
everybody,
it was more just called it was David, Gillian, and Chris, wasn't it? That was the only time you ever really saw anything up until 8.
Yes, exactly. And I think that for, a lot of the people, I'm always shocked. I am shocked by how many people on X-Files boards today are like, oh, I started watching the series in the 6th season. It's just like, what? That's when you started? Are you serious? Like the time that most series are coming to an end, that's when you start? Like, where were you? I think that, because of this influx, the shipper influx, and because David and Gillian just had this absolute magnetism, this once in a lifetime, lightning in a bottle magnetism and chemistry between each other. You want to play that up. And obviously, you've got Fox, they don't care of the stories. And it's all the same to them. What's the bottom line here?
Yeah.
And the bottom line for the X-Files was the Mulder and Scully relationship. So at least for their profit and loss
accounts,
margins, right?
Yeah.
So I think that I do think that it would have benefited. And like I said, I mean, one of the things that I really do appreciate about particularly the first season, you just had all these characters like, like the flirty handwriting girl, I'm not girl, lady, the flirty handwriting agent. And then the creepy fire guy, the creepy pyromaniac expert, right?
Yeah.
And then you had the guy in, the weird kind of doctor guy and that's one again, the other one, the hand one, the lizard hand one.
Roland.
No.
Young at heart.
Young at heart. Yes. So you just had all these kind of people kind of wandering in and out. And, you had, was it Agent Colton and Squeeze? It just feels a little bit more real. And the other thing that I really liked about season 1 is, I like the fact that it wasn't so heavily stylized. Like the cinematography was just a little bit more bare bones. Getting back to season 8 now, it's like I felt that the emotional content did start to veer a little bit more towards melodrama, and I think a lot of that's Kim's influence. But also it's kind of like the soapy, syrupy scores that Mark Snow. And again, it's absolutely no dig on him. It's just the nature of the beast, right?
Yeah.
But also, I always felt that Bill Rowe was just a little too painterly with the cinematography.
Right.
Incredibly talented guy, just absolute genius guy, right?
Yeah.
But I like the John Bartley school of like less is more.
Yeah.
Like Bill Rowe is kind of like more is more, and then more still is more, right? But it's very hard because Vancouver is just going to give you that vibe.
Yeah.
Just that kind of like television-y kind of vibe that feels like it's starting to encroach on the show. I don't think it's affecting the quality of the storytelling. I don't feel it's affecting the quality of the writing. It's just, again, it's the nature of the beast. It's a television program in its 8th season. It's in an increasingly competitive environment because at the same time slot you have the Alias and the Sopranos on.
Yeah.
Opposite them, there are all these kind of factors. And let me just say, it's astonishing that any show in its 8th season is going to, particularly, especially a genre show, right?
Yeah.
It's going to maintain that level of audience at that point in time, right?
Yeah. Definitely.
So, the ratings are nowhere near where they were in the glory days.
Yeah, they're kind of like, they started off at 15, almost 16 million, and were around about 11 mid-season, and it got down to around 10 for 3 words, and then picked up towards the end. So it's still hitting double figures.
Yes, it's still hitting double figures at, with serious competition. Serious. Sopranos was the it show. That was the hot show. That was the buzz show. And then for the kind of audience that the X-Files are appealing to, you have Alias on Breckley, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was something that the show had never had to contend with before. And even in that, so audience, the audience figures for network shows are starting to drop at the turn of the millennium, right? So that's one headwind. And the other headwind is the competition. The other headwind is the fact that every 8th season show, particularly a genre show, is going to start to collapse in the ratings. So given all that, I think it's an incredible testament to the show, to the people making it, the actors, the writers, the cinematographers, I mean, everybody who's working their hearts out on that show to maintain the success that show had maintained that late in the game, which is, again, it's stunning.
Yeah, definitely.
I just think it's just a testament to the absolute quality of this series. And I think that, again, 6 and 7 nowadays, I think I could compose like a single really solid season out of those two seasons.
Right. Yeah. An abridged version.
To me personally. But I think this is the last great stand of the X-Files.
Yeah.
And again, another headwind is that the show has just completely lost its buzz by this point in time. Like the feature film just took a lot of wind out of the show's sails.
Mm.
And I think that was why we just started seeing all these novelty and comedy episodes. Another thing, my next point, is that I love the fact that there are no comedy episodes this season. I got my fill of comedy in 6 and 7. I mean, because I think you could probably compose an entirely comedic season out of those two seasons, right?
Yeah.
Some of the ones are good, varying qualities, but I love the fact that it's just like, no, we're staying in our lane. We're going back to basics.
Yeah.
We're going to do what we do best, and we're going to do it well.
Yeah, and even like sort of, I mean, we talk about just generally now about like sort of moments and episodes as such. There's only Red Room that's kind of like an outlier from a science fiction perspective. We had like some Monday in 6, and Red Room's kind of like the one that jumps out when you look at the season as a whole.
Zone.
Yeah.
Twilight.
Yeah,
that was a Twilight, and we saw more of that in season 9 with like Audrey Foley and.
Are they Stephen Maeda episodes? Because that's generally his kind of bag, isn't it? I think.
I believe so. I think he co-written Red Room. Red Room's a great episode, but it just seems to be like it just gets lost in the shuffle. Joe Morton, just phenomenal. I mean, Joe Morton, it's like Doggett and Scully are the guests in that episode. They make like little cameo appearances. I mean, Joe Morton, that's really gutsy.
It is, yeah.
To make somebody who none of your viewers know basically the focus of your entire episode. But I thought he did a phenomenal job. I think he carried it well. I think he's a great actor. I think they gave him a lot to do. And the problem is that since it falls so far outside even the context of this 8th series that it just seems to just get lost in the shuffle. But I think it's just a tremendous episode. I think it's a great episode, and I think his performance is great. They were still doing interesting things, they were still trying things.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too that like this first adventure they throw Doggett into is the Man-Bat episode.
Yeah, Patience.
Chris Carter never read comic books in his entire life. Never even saw a comic book, never even heard a comic book. So that's why we have Man-Bat stories, and Super Soldiers, and and the Flash, and
never
Kid Lightning, and Chris Carter,
Yes, I've seen the post you've put on before where it's like, oh, that's an interesting story.
I think you might have misspoken what he actually meant is I read a shit ton of comic books when I was a kid. I think that maybe he was misquoted, right?
Yeah.
But do you get any more fanboy specific than Man-Bat? You know what I'm saying? Come on. And there's even elements in that story that are from a Man-Bat story from the early 70s. So
okay, then favorite moments, least favorite moments. Just a couple of anecdotes on that, and then we'll wrap this up for season 8. And as we head into season 9. So yeah, any highlights or lights?
The mythology overall, it's the highlight for me. It just seems so focused and so tight and so coherent. And, I love the fact that it was just a lot of it. It felt like it was like back to that season 3. Because even when you go back to season 3, even the things that aren't specifically mythology are kind of mythology.
Yeah.
Like Wet Wired is kind of it's basically a mythology episode. Right? So I just really appreciate that. I love the whole widescreen, that it started to feel like, a movie again, like a movie of the week rather than television, which 6 and 7, you cannot say without hesitation that was anything but television. And I just really appreciate that. Again, Doggett, Robert Patrick, I think is just MVP.
Yeah.
I think he knocked it out of the gate from the first second he appears on screen. You know exactly who he is. You know exactly what he's going to be. Just a tremendous synergy between writing and performing.
Yeah.
I love like having some characters come back, like obviously Krychek, Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah.
Gibson Praise. You know what I mean? And that was something that fans had always grumbled about, and I think rightly in this regard. It's like they introduce these great characters and then you never see them again.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that we did start to see some of these characters come back, which is good. Like Ma Scully shows up again. I don't think she'd been in the seasons. When the last time we saw Ma Scully? Gosh.
Oh, I'm not sure. It
might have been like I don't even remember when we saw her.
The Christmas Carol, maybe?
Yeah. So
Christmas Carol and Emily.
Yeah. So it was good to see her again. I just bring back the old faces.
Yeah.
I thought was great. Billy Miles, of course, but he had, before Teresa Hosey, from Becker and so on.
Yeah.
So I just think that was really effective. And again, the intimacy, bringing things back down to a level that I can relate, like a super soldier coming into your friggin' apartment, just scary, right? What I mean? Or Terminator or whatever, you know what I mean? And there is one moment that I just kills me. It's 1 second, basically. But it's so Deputy Haskell is being interrogated by Skinner and Doggett in Skinner's office.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of like, I know what you're all about, Scully. He's just kind of like dropping these hints, like very unsubtle hints.
Yeah.
And then when he leaves the office, I mean, Doggett just shoots her this look, bitch. Why you betrayed me? Why did you, it's just like he looks so hurt and so betrayed and so angry that I just think that's acting. That's great acting.
Because I like that. I like that bit when, as I say, when he says down to a T, because then Scully basically says, "Stay out of my business," and he realizes he's gone too far. And I just think that's a minutiae detail, and he does it so well.
Yeah, there's a lot of great interpersonal stuff between the characters, like a lot of great character development in an episode.
Yeah.
So, but I also, like I said, I love the Noel Rohrer character. We don't wait until further episode to see that he's a bastard. Right?
Yeah.
But another one of my favorite scenes is the meeting between Noel Rohrer and Doggett in his office when he's telling him about Billy Miles and everything.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
The way it's lit and the way it's shot, you really get the sense that like Noel Rohrer is not what we think he is. You know what I mean? It's like he is. Most of the scenes, he doesn't even blink. The way he's lit, he just looks so scary and alien. But it also reminds me so much of like, great old 70s Alan J. Bakula movies. You know what I mean? Like,
the Parallax View and stuff like that.
Yeah. Or, something like 3 Days of the Condor or, it just, or even All the President's Men. It just really just has that classic 70s conspiracy vibe that, Chris Carter was so obsessed with. We saw so many of those beats being hit in the earlier seasons. So I love that scene. I put that up there with, another one of my favorite Chris Carter scenes is from the third season with when Scully meets the well-manicured man.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, they'll kill you 1 of 3 ways or 1 of 2 ways. Right? that episode.
Have you got somewhere you might stay?
Yes. I mean, that whole sequence, that whole scene is just, that's just like when TV just becomes something else. It transcends itself.
Yeah.
Even at that late point in time, I would put that meeting between Noel Rohrer, and it's just like, whoever knows is in danger. I just want you to know, and it's just like he just exudes such menace.
Yeah.
Just such pure menace. And the great thing about Doggett too is that, Robert Patrick kind of played that where he you can tell that Robert Patrick's scared of him now. Like it isn't his old buddy from the military. It's somebody who he's afraid of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's great stuff. Yeah. I just, again, I just think it's great. And I think that if anybody's fans of the X-Files and they're not watching that season, they're just cheating themselves. Yeah. And it's just so many classic, even without David being in most of the season, there's just so many classic X-Files beats there used to be this pattern, right? So bands would come along and they'd have a sound, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like say like a hard rock sound.
Yeah.
And then like they kind of move away from it, like, they get bored of it or something. And you start hearing like strings and organs and, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden they're doing like most of the record is soft rock, like Alice Cooper in the 70s, like all of a sudden he's just doing soft rock albums with a couple token rock songs.
As a U2 fan, they went from kind of went all kinds, went from blues, then went to industrial rock. So yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah, well, it's like what U2 was doing around like Zoo Roper or something, where they just became like, what are we listening to? And then like the Passengers album, right?
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, what's going on there? So it's just like they went so far, they drifted so far from their moorings that like when they go back, it's like it's exciting. It's an eventful. It's like Black Sabbath. I mean, I love all Ozzy Black Sabbath, but like they kind of drifted pretty far from the formula by Never Say Die. And then the way they go back with Dio, and this is a great metaphor actually. So Dio comes in and they do Heaven and Hell, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, yeah, Sabbath, right? Yeah, it's Black Sabbath. This is the Sabbath I remember.
Yeah,
and it's an event. It's exciting. And that to me is like. That was, so they're pulling at the envelope. They're trying to stretch the envelope. They're trying all these novelties. They're trying to pull all these different rabbits on the hat.
Yeah.
The only thing left for them to do was just to go back to square one.
Yeah.
If they kept on with like the 6 and 7 kind of formula, it would just would have been a disaster.
I think every time we talk about seasons in general, we end up talking about a music analogy, because I think season 6, I was talking about them being like a season full of singles. So it's fascinating. So have you got anything that you don't particularly like? And we've already mentioned mine in the fact of the metal vertebrae, but anything that kind of gets that, or anything that kind of frustrates you with the season? I know you've mentioned about the music and stuff like that, but any particular episodes or particular moments that you're not quite on board with?
Well, the thing that does frustrate me about Salvage is that I think that could have been if they had cast a better actor, I think that could have been a much better episode.
Right.
I think that guy, was it Wade Williams or something? I don't want to say anything bad about the guy because I don't know him personally, but I just thought the performance is just astonishingly bad.
Because he goes on to do Prison Break, doesn't he, Wade Williams, I think?
Does he?
I think so. I think that's the person I'm thinking of, and he actually is really good in that. So I think it maybe just be a one-off on his on the actual episode itself.
It's Jeffrey Bell's script, so
yeah. Well, yeah.
Medusa, again, that should have been a slam dunk for me. So what we used to, we never paid to get out of the subway. We'd always hop fences, whatever. And one of the things we used to do is that the Green Line. So this is going to be a little inside baseball, but the one of the subways becomes streetcars at a certain point. What we used to do is that we'd run into the entrance on the street through the tunnels up to the subway platforms.
Right.
I think it was, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just like, it was incredibly dangerous. I don't know, we can get electrocuted or, hit by a train or whatever. But anyway, so I just, like I said, that is so part of my emotional landscape, from, when you're burned in your formative years. So I think that was another wasted opportunity. I just think that the whole thing just felt like Fringe, it was like proto Fringe.
It was, yeah.
And it wasn't even like a good episode of Fringe. And actually, to his credit, and like I said, Frank is an absolutely sterling individual. He has admitted that was kind of like, I just needed to write a script.
Yeah.
We just needed a script, and I just, whatever. I'm not proud of that. But I mean, there are some good elements to that, but I think that was just it wasn't a bad episode. It was a wasted opportunity.
Okay, Chris. Well, thank you very much for coming on. We will no doubt get you on season 9, as you are one of the outliers who really like season 9. Yeah, so that calls this season 8 a wrap. So look out for all the specials. Remember, we've got the Patreon as well. So by all means, jump on there where we'll have interviews from various different people and various specials. But Chris, until next time, where can people find you online and what are you up to at the moment?
We're coming up on the 15th anniversary of The Secret Son.
All right, okay.
So I've got all sorts of goodies coming up on that. I just released a new edition, an ebook, EPUB edition of my books, Almost American Midnight. I added 270 pages of new material there. I don't think that will be in a print edition because it'll be like a phone book. Nobody knows what a phone book is anymore.
No.
Remember that? In,
Well, unless you're watching, what was it? The Mulder does something, doesn't he? When he points, it was in Goldberg Variation. He uses a phone book in Goldberg Variation. I think that's the last time I saw a phone book.
well, he also uses one in 3.
Yes, and
But the great line when Dr. Day is like, I'm in the phone book.
Oh, yes.
Nobody-
Yeah, that's true.
Nobody knows what a phone book is anymore. Yeah, so just come over to see your son and we'll get you sorted out. But a lot of stuff, a lot of irons in the fire. So.
With regards to myself, you can find me on Linktree. That Linktree address is linktr.ee/r Muldrake. That's RMULDRAKE. My most recent venture is my new YouTube channel on the TV show Lost. Every week I'm doing a little video, whether that's a playthrough on the game, whether it's just talking about Lost in general, about I'm doing a chronological watch, and just various little bits on that, and some Lost-related material. So I'm covering the TV show From, which has got Harold Perrineau on. So just find me on that Linktree, and that's the best place to find me. But thank you so much for listening, and until next time, remember, as always, trust no one.
Hey guys, my name is Tony Black, podcaster and author, and I'm here to tell you about Partisan, a podcast about politics and history in film and entertainment. I'll be joined by guests as we discuss films, TV shows, and maybe a little bit more, examining political and historical topics, such as how Elvis intersects with black cultural history.
In Lerman's film, the idea of the black characters are maybe they're used as catalysts to basically move Elvis forward in his career. I think that's how I saw it.
The rise and fall of Richard Nixon.
It seems to be, historians seem to agree with this, is that he was the first president that really capitalized on the evangelical vote and politicized them.
The disturbing class satire in society, and much, much more. Partisan is free to download on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast app of choice, and you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at PartisanPod. I hope you'll vote with your feet and join us on the journey. The Xcast and X-Files podcast was created by Tony Black and is produced and hosted by Carl Sweeney, Sarah Blair and Kurt North.
You can find the podcast on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the Xcast, and in our group, X-Files Basement, the Xcast podcast fan group, and on Instagram at the Xcast pod.
Don't forget, you can support the show by becoming a member on Patreon. Our patrons get early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes chats with our hosts and a thriving community of X-Files, and other premium interviews and specials. To find out more and subscribe, you can go to patreon.com/thexcast. That's patreon.com/thexcast.
We are also part of the We Made This podcast network, full of popular culture shows, including our Millennium series, The Time Is Now. You can find all of our shows at our website, wemadethispod.com, or via Twitter at wemadethispod.
Thanks for listening and keep watching the skies.